Thank you for coming. Now we're coming to the afternoon session. Before coming to the Annual General Assembly 19th, the plenary session where we provide you what we discuss in the IB meeting, etc., etc. But before this plenary session this time, especially this the AGA19, we invite very famous speaker, Kate Adamson, here in this room. She called herself the futurist, right? The futurist, Kate Adamson, tells a story of the future and inspirational keynote speaker. Writer and a presenter, and she offers a visionary perspective on the impact of the global megatrend. You see that some of you remember that we need to change for the future, right? Breakthrough the technologies and the new generational mindset and how they will radically transform our lives in the year ahead. Kate advises a huge range of industry, coaching their leaders towards new digital visions and transformation, and also work with startup and the investor shaping the exponential, not just a lamp line, exponential, yes? Exponential organizations and then the ecosystem of the future. You see, this is exactly the maritime. Yeah. So I think I predicted that we really enjoyed her presentation today. We plan to have around how many lengths of the speech?
About 40 minutes.
Okay, about 40 minutes. And then after that, the Q&A, time for Q&A. And I really need to have your active discussion. And then this is actually, this kind of a discussion and the input, I really like to use this kind of a discussion for for considering the contents of the Tokyo Statement. You know that I'm already considered, I'm sorry for my Barcelona friend, that I'm now already start considering the future. So the AGA20, and at that moment I would like to submit and then issue the Tokyo Statement. I want to use her presentation as a kind of the fundamental knowledge, and then that's why so they're really looking forward to hearing your presentation. Yes, thank you. Kate, I want to invite you to be here in front. You already set up your presentation in this one?
I think it's probably going to appear like magic very shortly. I'm hoping it's going to appear like magic very shortly. There we are, like magic. That's it. We're good. You're done now. You can go sit down and relax. Just hand over to me.
No, anyway,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to get to come and address all of you. So, thank you. In August 2007, BNP Paribas suddenly blocked access to 3 of its major hedge funds, citing a total evaporation of liquidity within the market. This was the opening shots of the global financial crisis. And within a year, October, 10 years ago exactly, Lehman Brothers collapsed. It's estimated that that's cost the global economy to date about 22 to 24 trillion US dollars. This is the world's first bank. For those of you who come from Italy, it's in Venice. It's near the Ponte di Rialto. And the first bank, this was created in the 11th, 12th century. And the guys used to sit outside at benches, banco, which is where we get the word banker from. And when they went bust, to stop them trading, they would break their benches. Banco rotto, which is where we get bankrupt from today. Interestingly enough, bankrupt, banco rotto, also applied to a shipwreck. See where I'm going with this now? The global financial crash has its roots in the concept of limited liability. And guess who came up with that? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it was shipping. Shipping came up with limited liability because the dangers, the expense of sea travel led to the development of something called the Kommende, which were the first ever limited liability partnerships designed to protect sea captains, cargo owners, etc. And corporate law, double entry bookkeeping, all that stuff soon followed on. The Renaissance was an absolutely fascinating period because in many respects it laid the foundations for the world that we all live in today. And it arose from a series of major global shifts. So, for example, a bunch of megatrends like climate change. We were in the medieval warm period and we suddenly moved into the Little Ice Age. It became much, much colder. Demographic change. You may have heard something called the Black Death, the bubonic plague. Killed lots of people, completely changed the economy, as did the growth of sea trade and the demise of feudalism. Then you have these breakthrough technologies that were appearing, like the printing press, the astrolabe, the marine chronometer, gunpowder, firearms. And then finally, these different mindsets around civic humanism, you know, the Renaissance man, the scientific revolution, the shift from the Ptolemaic to the Copernican attitude toward the constellation and the heavens. And you know what? Those foundations are being shaken again right now because we have this range of global megatrends like climate change, the shift in influence from the G to the E7, rapid urbanization, resource scarcity, demographic changes, the transitions in our economies from goods to services. And we have a range of breakthrough technologies, many of which, if not all of those you recognize, nanotech, blockchain, biotech, quantum, etc. And once again, we have these uniquely different generational mindsets. The Gen Ys, the millennials, and the Gen Zs, they prefer access over ownership. They value sustainability, collaboration, purpose and people over profit is their mantra. But actually this time, unlike the Renaissance, something is different, and it's profoundly different. This is an exponential curve. You heard Takeshi use the word earlier, and I'm sure most of you will be familiar with it. But the thing is, exponential growth means that at every point, things are doubling. 30 steps on the exponential curve gets you to 1 billion. And, you know, we find that difficult to understand. We find it difficult to wrap our heads around. This is a still from The Sun Also Rises, a movie from the book by Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway in that book has one character ask another, how did you go bankrupt? And the guy says 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. That's exponential growth. But we do find it difficult to really understand it. We shouldn't, though, because it's where we come from. In order to get from a fertilized egg to a full-grown baby, it's exponential growth. Cell mitosis is exactly the same process. But when it comes to our everyday lives, exponential growth really foxes us. And our problem is that it's not just one technology moving exponentially we have to deal with. We have the foundations like internet, social, mobile, and then the accelerators like 3D printing and Internet of Things. And what they're throwing out, as you can see here, is a huge range of massively disruptive scenarios that could and will hit anyone, anytime. I'm often asked, is this evolution or is this revolution? Well, my response to that is, when things begin evolving at this speed, it kind of turns into revolution. That's the way I look at it. These 3 things, the megatrends, the exponential technologies, and the mindsets, are really the foundations, you know, in the same way they were at the Renaissance. And if you think about it, I think of them like 3 tectonic plates. Now, when you have 3 tectonic plates meeting, it's called a triple junction. And I think that's where we're standing now. As the human race, we are standing at an existential triple junction, and the changes are going to be absolutely seismic. And that's why it's not enough to talk about a technology paradigm or a machine age, because the truth is that the world is likely to change more in the coming 30 to 50 years than it did in those centuries between the Renaissance and the beginning of the 20th century. If you think in the 11th century, this was the summit of human sophistication. Yet by 1440, we have the first information revolution with the printing press. 50 years later, you have Da Vinci designing the first aerial screw in 1715. You have Thacker's marine chronometer. But what we're moving into now is what I call the e-naissance, the birth of the exponential age, the second Renaissance. And I think it may look a little something kind of a bit like this. I like that. That always makes me smile. As futurists, we say that the biggest mistake that companies make is in preparing for what is rather than what might be. And that's becoming increasingly difficult because our lives and our expectations of our lives are going to change really radically. We have 3 overlapping revolutions in genetics and nanotechnology and robotics. We're going to do things that we've never been able to do before. We're going to reprogram our own biology. We're going to manipulate matter at a molecular level, and we will create a greater than human, non-biological intelligence, artificial intelligence. On the right is Madeline. She was born in 1999. She's a Gen Y millennial. And on the left is Clementine. She was born in 2003, and she is a Gen Z. They're also my daughters, and they say, good afternoon. Now, Clemmy, like the average 14-year-old in the UK today, could live to 120 years old. She could work until she's 100. She could have 30, 40, 50 different careers in her lifetime, which means that the idea of a job for life is over. And in fact, the idea of a job at all is in question. Why? Because everything that can be automated is being automated. And that puts massive pressure on our economic and societal structures. You've probably heard of universal basic income. The idea that every citizen is given a basic stipend to keep body and soul together, one of the ideas to combat creeping automation. The EU is already voting on declaring robots to be electronic persons. If you're a person, you can be taxed. See, there's logic here. And you've probably seen Sophia, the AI bot, who was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia just last year. I could probably make some jokes about that, but I'm not going to. If we're all going to live so long, of course, we need to keep the lights on. Well, what you're looking at here is the inside of a prototype compact nuclear fusion reactor from the Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin, effectively emission-free, limitless energy. They reckon that they could have a working prototype of this, which, by the way, would sit in something the size of a shipping container within the next 5 or so years. And we're going to need that kind of energy because you know where we're going next? We are going up. In 1 quarter of 2017 alone, over 157 million US dollars was invested in asteroid mining companies like Planetary Resources. Moon Express estimate that an asteroid the size of a football field could have platinum in it to the value of between 50 and 100 billion US dollars. Moon Express are planning to bring the first commercially harvested stuff back from space by the early 2020s. And this is a quantum computer from D-Wave. It's cost 15 million US dollars, around about that, and you can see it stands pretty tall as well. But imagine when you think of those pictures of those old mainframes now. We are going to need quantum computing to do all the bits and pieces that we're planning to do in the future. And in fact, quantum encrypted data was sent earlier this year between China and Austria, the first quantum encrypted data, which gets us closer to a global quantum encrypted internet. That all sounds a bit sort of far-fetched in a way and not really relevant, doesn't it? But where it is going to get very relevant very quickly is in medicine, precision medicine, personalized medicine. CRISPR gene editing, which, by the way, stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, in case you think all I do is watch Star Trek, that could lead to the eradication of certain genetic illnesses within the next decade or so. Totally eradicated. Then there's cancer-killing nanoparticles, 3D printed organs, or organoids as we're calling them, DNA-based computing, the microbiome, and transhumanism, the point at which we effectively merge to an extent with the technology that we're seeing today. You probably heard last year Elon Musk launched a company called Neuralink, which is designed to commercialize brain-computer interfaces, implanted technology in your brain, initially for medical purposes, but within 8 to 10 years in the general population. And this guy, although he looks like he's had an outbreak of techno-acne, he hasn't actually. This was released by DARPA about 2 weeks ago. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the USA. This guy controlled a swarm of drones telepathically using this equipment. That happened a couple of weeks ago. That's not even the future. And this is a burger. I can see the relief. I know what that is. Okay, but it's not just any burger, I'm afraid. Although this burger, I'm reliably informed, tastes indistinguishable from cow, you sling it on a barbie, it'll char and it'll even bleed. It has no meat in it. It uses a vegetable enzyme called leg hemoglobin to taste identical to meat. So why am I telling you all this? Well, there's a wonderful Chinese saying that says, a frog in a well only sees his piece of the sky. And when I was kindly invited to Tokyo late last year, I discovered there's a Japanese version, which I think I like even more. A frog in a well cannot conceive of the ocean. What I'm trying to get across to you is that technologies are combining to create this intense disruption. And if you focus only on one technology or one sector, as we traditionally have, then you can miss the impacts and the opportunities that are driven by this convergence. We're used to technologies that do one thing: medical technology, maritime technology. This is information-enabled technology. It does anything and everything. If you look at these companies, they tell you something important. That is, the vertical markets are transitioning into ecosystems, and ecosystems form around platforms. And we can talk a lot about platforms, but there's one that you have to understand before we go any further. It's a computing platform. The first was the mainframe, the second was the client server, and we are now at the third platform. They were up all night coming up with that. It's based on social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, with the Internet of Things as an accelerator. But what it's supporting is critical. It's called the Intelligent Digital Mesh. And the Intelligent Digital Mesh is essentially a hugely growing number of endpoints, which could be assets, individuals, devices, whatever, which you have real-time online connection with. This is digital transformation. Because digital transformation is powered by information flows. We talk a lot about big data, but what we don't talk about is the fact that this data is unstructured. So right now, about 90% of business data, 35 zettabytes, is unstructured data. It means we've entered this era of data chaos, and we've got to do something about that because there's a new game in town. It's called infonomics, basically how you assert economic value from information, making money from information. And this is why it's important. McKinsey Global Institute last year did some econometric research, and they found that data flows now exert a greater economic impact than traditional goods flows. So what they're saying is, since the financial crash, flows of goods and finance have lost momentum, whereas cross-border bandwidth has absolutely surged, and it's predicted to continue surging. So relevant for us here in this room, because what they're saying is that the world's global physical trade networks that we have spent centuries developing have been eclipsed in their economic impact by cross-border data flows which 15 years ago were pretty much negligible. As I stand here today, around about 50% of the world's traded services have already been digitized, and we haven't even started yet. This is partly because global businesses are busily integrating their operations into this seamless digital whole, Industry 4.0, which basically embeds all these technologies in a global value chain that crosses borders, integrates the physical and the digital worlds. What we're seeing is that connectivity and mobility are beginning to merge, and that's underpinned by information and powerful artificial intelligence. It's been described as the second machine age. If you think, the first machine age, we augmented the power of our muscles, horsepower. Now we're augmenting the power of our minds. The bottom line is that data really is kind of the new oil, but data and AI together are certainly the lifeblood of Industry 4.0. So, this is it, the DX economy, the digital economy. You are welcome to it. And it has some really big implications, because we can now do things we couldn't before, like automate physical assets. We can develop multi-sided business models that leverage exhaust data and get value out of it. Business silos are beginning to break down. Organizations of every kind have to change in response. They have to structure differently, adopt new outlooks in order to capitalize on this. And for maritime and shipping, it's particularly acute, because there's something called the new economics. Someone called it Adamsonian economics, so I thought it was so good I had to put it up there. Okay, we've been in a demographic sweet spot, and it's over. In 2015, average global life expectancy climbed to 71.4 years. As a planet, we're getting older. Older people buy differently from younger people. They go on holiday, they buy healthcare. It doesn't translate into seaborne volumes. Now, normally that wouldn't be a problem, because you have a generation coming up behind who start buying stuff. But uniquely, since we started measuring this stuff, the millennial generation have disposable income around about 20% lower than their parents did. And of course, this is a generation that value access over ownership, sustainability, care about the planet. And I know what you're going to say, it's fine, because we've got these vast young populations in India and Africa, and they're going to gear up and start buying all our stuff, which would be fine if it wasn't for the fact that we have this digital industrial revolution, Industry 4.0, which is opening the gates to massive gains in productivity and efficiency. But what it's not going to do is create those low-skilled manufacturing jobs that made the Chinese wealthy. So this idea that there's just this never-ending path of consumer growth really is very difficult to find any evidence for. There's other things as well, things like the circular economy. I hope you've all heard of the circular economy, the idea that this take, make, dispose model that we have at the moment simply is no longer sustainable, looking at use cycles rather than life cycles. An institute in the UK looked at a circular transformation in the automotive and machining industries, and they believe that it could achieve a net material saving of 170 million metric tons of iron ore a year. That's 170 million metric tons of iron ore a year that won't be shipped anymore. That's how relevant this is to us. Then I showed you the impossible burger earlier. Well, it's not just the impossible burger. Everything from bioengineering new food sources to farm tech, ag tech, absolutely huge amounts of investment going in there. Cargill are investing in artificial lab-grown meat. These are shipping's customers. Shipping is intimately connected with these global food chains, which are going to shift beyond all belief. Then there's electric cars. And the first thing one thinks is, oh, well, never mind, poor old tanker sector. You know, they won't be running on gasoline. But actually, it's bigger than that, because the internal combustion engine has around about 2,000 odd moving parts, which have huge supply chains and manufacturing chains around them. Electric cars don't. They have around about 20 or 25 moving parts. So it's not just the fact that it's a different fuel. It's the fact that all of those little bits and pieces that get shipped around the world in boxes are just going to disappear. They're not going to be required any longer. And talking of shipping things around the world in boxes, PwC did some very interesting research a couple of years ago, looking just at 3D printing, just one technology. And they reckon that it could put paid to 37% of global container volumes permanently. And just for some context here, around about 42% of air cargo volumes as well. And then there's blockchain. We'll talk more about blockchain, but just think of it in this way. Blockchain automates trust and it disintermediates. And shipping and maritime is an industry full of middlemen and women. You don't always hear this at shipping conferences, unless I'm there, obviously. And there's a reason for that. It's because, generally speaking, maritime industries are failing to distinguish between linear growth that we're used to and this new exponential growth. They're trying to use the past to predict the future. And that's why they're coming unstuck, because you can't do that anymore. It is no longer sufficient to preserve the status quo. This is something completely new. This is Novus ordo seclorum. Not a new world order, but a new order of the ages. It's more fundamental than political or geopolitical shifts. And you know what? You are at the heart of the disruption. Because intelligent transportation systems are going to be the veins and the arteries of Industry 4.0. You're the people who are going to set about merging the physical and the digital world. So, you know, will they be driverless and unmanned? Well, probably. Will they be smart, highly integrated and interoperable? For sure they will be. No question about it at all. We have this range of interdependencies and reinforcing effects, from electrification of vehicles to smart networks, connectivity, edge computing, all of these things moving together. And they, between them, will help us to fundamentally reshape the supply chain and the logistics industry. So actually, what you're really looking at here, which may sound a bit bleak, no, it's not. This is the greatest opportunity since the advent of steam, for those of us who are genuinely interested in the shipping and the maritime industry. This will be the last generation of ships as we know them, because virtually no ship sailing today, certainly deep sea, will be unmanned. And there's a good reason for that. It's not because we don't have the technology, because the technology is developing all the time. The roadblock actually is propulsion. Because electrification on land is acting as a reinforcing effect, but deep sea security of operation mean we can't look at renewable energy for ships that are crossing oceans. At the moment, there is no alternative but bunker fuel. And until we change that, it's difficult to see how we're going to be able to take people off the ships, because you've got to keep those engines running. Of course, we have the sulfur cap coming in. What might that do? Well, it makes deep sea vessels less cost efficient for the charterers. And at the moment, they're already less sustainable. But once they start getting more expensive, what might that do? Well, we know customers want flexible, interoperable solutions. So could we be moving to a new era where we see bigger fleets, but of smaller ships? Deep sea, short sea, and inland waterways beginning to merge as part of a much smarter overall network. What could autonomous unmanned ships mean, for example, for ports? Well, unmanned operation demands reliability. If you're going to take people off a vehicle, the vehicle has to be highly reliable. And you can do that with cars and with trucks and even with aeroplanes, because they're standardized. But in the maritime industry, we don't have that. We have series ships. But effectively, every ship is pretty much a prototype. If you are going to get reliability, you need to standardize. And looking at the orders in shipyards at the moment, there's a very good possibility we could be seeing a much smaller range of shipyards. The role of shipyards will probably change entirely, become more about systems integration, intelligent materials. And of course, if we don't have people on the ships, where are we going to move maintenance to? Maybe hyper-connected ports, maybe alongside 3D print fabs, and other hyper-intelligent systems, like maybe the Hyperloop, drones, and warehouse and delivery systems. Anyone heard of the physical internet? No? Excellent. Somebody has, that's wonderful. The physical internet, the idea of the physical internet is effectively that we redefine the global logistics system in the same way that digital redefined communications networks. And intelligent ships, unmanned ships, could actually become a constituent part of that. At the moment, the roadmap for that is about 2040 to 2050, because right now, global logistics is unsustainable. Don't say it out loud, particularly not in front of Amazon. But global logistics is unsustainable. We have to achieve a better way of doing things. You know, and the ships, once you get broader connectivity, faster connectivity, more IoT on board, that broadens the intelligent digital mesh. It means intelligent endpoints on that vessel are going to start doing all sorts of things that they couldn't do before. Not only will they monitor themselves, they'll actually begin to adjust things when they believe it's necessary. They will identify their own requirements for refurbishment, for replacement. And right now, they'll tell you that things need to be refurbished or replaced. But in a few more years, once the ship is directly connected to procurement systems, it'll just go ahead and order it. And thanks to blockchain and smart contracts, it'll even be able to pay for it as well. Smart contracts on the blockchain will allow components to trade independently under approved contract terms. And in fact, Honda and Visa are already collaborating on this. How do we allow vehicles without anybody in them to actually go and fill up with gas or pay for parking, etc.? Really going to push your buttons now. Where do we go after that? Well, as The Economist said, the next step is for robots to go into business for themselves. For example, a computer server renting out processing capacity and using the profits to upgrade itself. It's called the economy of things. By identifying and matching up the need for services, you can actually create these hyper-efficient digital networks which have no human interaction whatsoever. And it throws up a very interesting opportunity because, you know, we talk a lot about data, lots of data in shipping, and this data we can monetize. Well, actually, once blockchain gears up and enables the economy of things, ships and their processing power could play in these markets. You think blockchain is highly energy intensive. If we're going to use blockchains, we're going to have to find ways of actually finding the energy to keep them running. And it could well be that spare processing capacity floating around on the ocean could be part of huge digital markets, creating revenue for ship operators, managers, and the ecosystems around them. Not just data, but processing power. I expect you recognize this. This is a shot from 2001, The Space Odyssey, where HAL, the intelligent computer, locks an astronaut out of the pod bay doors. By the way, if anybody has an iPhone and you fancy a bit of fun, find a quiet corner and ask Siri to open the pod bay doors and see what she says to you. Nice little engineer planted joke there. I wrote an article about it and I called it Aye, Aye, Captain. Because we look at this and we all go, okay, well, that's it. You know, we're just not going to have people on vessels anymore, are we? I mean, obviously, if this all happens, we won't need them. But goodness me, it's so much bigger than that. Expertise, automation, and augmentation software is a very long way of saying we're all in trouble. This is a market map of the kind of EAS software and where it is. Lawyers, teaching assistants, HR managers, researchers, consultants, investment managers, even MBAs are vulnerable to this kind of artificial intelligence. So the idea that this is just going to be low-skilled workers who don't have jobs anymore is completely false. More than 100,000 legal roles to become automated. You know, the number one question I get asked after one of these things always is, what the hell should I tell my children to do? You know, and one of them, don't go in the legal profession. Really, don't do that. Not knowledge work. You may have seen this before. This is a Hans Moravec's landscape of human competence. And what he's done here is effectively show technology and artificial intelligence as the sea encroaching upon the land. So you can see already it's beaten us at chess, arithmetic, Jeopardy, investment, Go, beat us out not that long ago. You see the peaks here are still things that we think we're, you know, safe on our peaks for the moment. But it's interesting because as automation creeps in, then the occupations that put emphasis on the skills that make us most human are probably going to see major growth. That's what's going to help us to remain relevant in this new world of work We need to lean into those skills that make us human. And here's an interesting thing. Women excel in the one skill that AI, by definition, doesn't have. Emotional intelligence, EQ. Women consistently outperform men in all tests of EQ. And this is why it's critical. Remember I said things are developing into ecosystems? Well, this is an outline from Frank Diana at Tata Consultancy Services. What he's showing you here is how those ecosystems are going to develop, from partner cooperation, where we are over here on the left, right the way through to full value integration, a level of integration that we sitting here in this room could probably not even really get our heads around at the moment. And as Boston Consulting Group said, it's absolutely urgent that physical incumbents start investing in the management skills essential for ecosystem building and management. And you know what? They are not the skills that we're traditionally used to. The collaborative nature of these ecosystems demands new kinds of leadership. And actually, it's less suited to the traditional male archetype, competitive, risk-taking, controlling. It far better suits the traditional female archetype, flexible, open, and distributed. It was interesting that Credit Suisse did some research over 6 years, and they discovered, about 2,500 companies, they discovered that those with women on their boards outperform those without by up to 26%. And the key thing is to have women on the executive team, in line roles, in revenue-driving roles, not just in HR, marketing, and legal. It's a picture of durian fruit. I'm sure you've all traveled. I'm sure lots of you have been to Asia. For those of you who haven't, durian fruit has an interesting aroma, shall we say, to the extent that it's actually banned on public transport in Singapore and certain parts of Malaysia. And you know what? I think the gender diversity is the durian of low-hanging fruit in the shipping industry, because actually it tastes really, really good. It's just people can't get by the smell of it. People just can't get by the smell of having to have women in their organization. They can't understand that the data shows that this is really a simple and fast way to completely change your mindset in your organization. It can make you money, but we don't like it. It's change. This is huge change in every industry. And actually, we've got a couple of problems specifically here in maritime. The first one is mindsets. And the second one actually is mindsets. Now, I know technically it's only one, but it's such a big one I thought was probably worth putting up there twice. I do a lot of this with companies. They generally fall into one of two categories. Either they view all this as a technology wave, and they internalize it as a threat to their legacy operations and their revenue streams, or, more accurately, they identify it as a business transformation wave and an opportunity for completely different ways of value creation. Innovation, which is what we're really talking about here, innovation is about finding the right questions, and that means sometimes turning things on their heads and questioning some very basic assumptions that you might have. Because as Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. This is my colleague Gerd Leonard, a book I thoroughly recommend, Technology versus Humanity. He says machines are for answers and humans are for questions. And in the future, that really is going to be the case. And that causes us a problem in terms of education, because education, for the last several hundred years, has all been based around getting the right answer. And the thing is, if we're going to go head-to-head just to get the right answer all the time, then machines are going to beat us hollow, because they're kurimas at that stuff. They're really good at answers, but they're not so good at just questions. But the mechanistic view of education has been around for centuries. What do? We learn as much as we can in the time available. We regurgitate information on demand. And in order to scale that, you have to standardize things, naturally. So we end up with a static qualification at the end of it. Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." What he's basically saying is, things are changing all the time. But actually, for the last couple of centuries, that river has run quite slowly. Information and knowledge have remained comparatively static, and it's made the mechanistic education paradigm work. It's made that function. This is still from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I don't know if any fans of that movie. If you're my vintage, I was a teenager when it came out. It's all about this US high school student who decides he's going to take a day off college. And there's a very famous quote from it. He says, "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it." Well, interestingly enough, if you look at the half-life of a business skill or a competence, back in 1984, when Ferris Bueller was being made, that's about 30 years. Today, it is 5 years. So Ferris Bueller was dead wrong. Life wasn't moving that fast, but it sure as hell is moving fast today. And it puts huge pressure on the way that we are educating everybody. You know, the idea at the moment is you teach a man to fish, you know, and then he can provide fish for the rest of his life, but that makes a couple of assumptions. It assumes that what we know is going to remain relatively static long enough for it to be worth passing on. A 3-year degree course for a skill that's only going to be relevant for 5. It also assumes that there will always be fish to catch and the techniques for catching them are going to remain pretty static. But actually the reality is the lake is shrinking and what's left is looking less and less like fish. Digital widens participation, but conversely, it also creates precision. So you know in the old days, market researchers would say, you know, you're an A1, 2, B, C, D, you know, they categorize you into groups. That's not relevant anymore. Now it's about the segment of one, literally about the individual, because we expect hyper-personalized experiences in every walk of life. And here's the thing, digital allows you to provide those personalized experiences on a massive scale at a comparatively negligible cost compared to what it would have done in the old days. Recognize this guy? Yeah? The everything store? Wrong. Absolutely wrong. Amazon is the everyone store. Amazon uses the intelligent digital mesh to create a personalized, hyper-personalized service to each and every one of us. But it's not just flogging shirts and the socks and teddy bears that can use personalization. Out in Malawi, they have huge classes, maybe 60, 70 children. So a charity partnered with an app developer and said, could we develop an app for English and maths that could help these kids with so few teachers? So they developed these apps, and they were so incredibly successful that they decided to trial them in an English, a UK primary school. So they took these apps to these children 4 or 5 years old, and for 1 hour a day, English and maths on each of these apps. Within 6 weeks, they had accelerated those children 18 months ahead of their peers in the other class that didn't have access to the apps. Part of the way that was done was because it was a gamified app. Gamified doesn't mean sitting there shooting things. What it means is that you don't move up to the next level until you've got 100% on the level you're on. It doesn't unlock the next stage of learning for you until you've totally understood where you are right now. That's what makes the difference. The cargo operations and management level at Warsash requires a 70% pass mark. That means that somebody can have completely failed to understand up to 30% of everything they were taught and still get their ticket. Now you just stop for a moment. You imagine if you use gamification to make sure that every single person with that qualification got 100%. Imagine a world where that pass mark was 100%. Crew fatality rates in the maritime industry are 10 times OECD best practice. We have some of the most highly qualified and highly trained personnel on the planet, and yet we can't shift that figure. Precision learning using things like gamification could close that gap between compliance and competency. What I'm trying to get across to you is that you have to use technology to put people at the heart of what you do. And that includes creating entirely new learning environments. Because you have to remember that the intelligent digital mesh is turned into this external global nervous system. It connects people all over the world, and it can have astonishing results. You'll be very grateful to know, I'm not going to show you the video of the guy who has had 100 million hits on YouTube riding elevators. Yeah? Can you believe that? Seriously, 100 million people tune into YouTube to watch this guy riding elevators. Why would you do that? But I'm going to give you a maritime example here. These guys created some, sort of recruitment kind of video, and I saw this on Twitter. This guy is saying, superb video. We'll use it in schools as soon as London International Shipping Week is over. Your challenge is to get it on a primetime TV advert. No. 1,000 times no. No. This is where digital natives live. This is where they connect with each other. This is where their tribes are. And if you can engage these tribes, then you can move mountains. As I say, forget the guy with 100 million views on YouTube with his lifts. What about the Hyperloop project? The Hyperloop, for those of you who may not have heard of it, effectively it's a completely new transportation mode, a vacuum tube traveling 700 miles an hour. We won't go into that. The point is, one of the teams racing to build it is the biggest crowdsourced project on the planet. They have raised over, I think it's $150 million US dollars now. And they've raised that by help, by people taking part in the project from all over the world. And they've used the intelligent digital mesh to connect them. Bebop, the chairman, is a friend of mine. I thought I'd show you his business card. The front isn't so interesting, but it's what's on the back that's good. Will history remember your name? That's how you engage tribes. A big, hairy, audacious goal. So the reality is, much like that Hyperloop project, the people who can really solve maritime's problems, they probably aren't in your university. And in fact, they probably don't want to be in your university. And that's not a criticism of your university. What we're trying to say is that individuals can do things now and participate in a way that they couldn't before. This lady is Eva Herrada de Grado. I can tell you a little story about her. She did a maritime degree at UPM, I think, in Madrid. And then she was very lucky to get an internship with DNVGL. And while she was there, she was looking at the problem of calculating added resistance of wind and waves on hulls. You need computational fluid dynamics, tank tests, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to research all this kind of stuff. And she said, well, maybe you could use an artificial neural network. Maybe you could use machine learning to do this. So problem was that Eva didn't know how to actually use that kind of stuff. So she taught herself to use a program called MATLAB, which you need to use to do this. She taught herself. When I spoke to her, she said, yeah, well, everybody knew how to use it at DNVGL, and I didn't like to ask, so I just spent a bit of time with Google and worked it out for myself. She developed an artificial neural network, and she went to DNVGL, and she said, I need data to train this. You got any data? They said, yeah, okay, you can have our GL Rankin seakeeping code. So she used DNVGL's proprietary data that nobody else has access to. She trained this neural network to within 99% accuracy. What Eva did there was not only teach herself how to code in MATLAB, but she also managed to utilize data that no one else had access to actually develop an artificial neural network, a way of making that calculation available to everybody. That calculation can be done anywhere now, by anyone. That's phenomenal. And DNVGL had all that data sitting there, doing absolutely nothing with it, until somebody smart like Eva came along and said, I could use that. Give people access to data. Give them access to your problems, and very often, they'll solve them for you. And here's the thing. Eva may not stay in the maritime industry. She's got all sorts of plans to do all sorts of different things. But the thing is, she came in, she's helped us solve a problem. She may go somewhere else and solve another problem now. So you cannot expect these millennials and Gen Zs to spend 25 or 30 years in your industry any longer. What they want is immersive learning environments. And it's interesting, they don't just want to be taught. Have you noticed they want to be supported? I hear this a lot from organizations that I work with. It can be quite needy, these millennials. Not like us Gen Xers, got tough, we're going to work, we're expecting a few knocks. These kids actually have a completely different attitude. And it isn't that they don't expect knocks, it's that they don't think anybody should have knocks. It's a completely different attitude to the kind of support they expect both in learning environments and in working environments. And of course, they also expect seamless and completely frictionless technology, and guess what? That's exactly what they're about to get. Remember I mentioned the third platform? Well, we're approaching the fourth platform now. As I said, there's no imagination in naming these platforms. The fourth platform is going to be built on blockchain, quantum, and artificial intelligence. And it's going to produce what we're calling ambient computing. The fourth platform, essentially, is going to be the point at which we integrate technology with human biosystems. It's on the horizon. It'll be augmented everything, augmented immunity, augmented memory and cognition. Augmented humanity is where we're going. So the fourth platform really is us. There won't be computing platforms anymore. We're the point at which the computing platform becomes us, and of course artificial intelligence. Because of course, what I just read out there, augmented cognition and memory, how does that fit with the current educational paradigm? If everybody can have an implant that enables them to remember anything that you tell them, how do we sort anything out then? We just turn ourselves into machines. Surely that's the point at which then we need to break apart pedagogy and schooling, the way the Greeks used to, many, many years ago. You had a pedagogue who was often a slave, and that was different from your schoolmaster. And the slave stayed with the child and taught them and guided them. I put this little quote up here from Castle. He said he was more important than the schoolmaster because the latter only taught the boy his letters, but the pedagogue taught him how to behave, a much more important matter in the eyes of his parents. The schoolmaster had no such close contact with his pupils. Now, when you think about how artificial intelligence could change the way we can remember and recall things, and I see pictures like this of little kids with artificial intelligence, I begin to wonder, maybe we will separate the two again. Maybe it will be artificial intelligence that stays with our children from birth to the age of 14 and helps to guide them and navigate their way around. This would not surprise me in the least. Are you all feeling a bit like this? Well, I'd be surprised if you're not. It's a completely natural reaction because this is pretty heavy stuff. These are tuna fish. Let's go back to something we all recognize. These are tuna fish. I find them absolutely fascinating, and this is why. Because of their biological design, they have to have oxygenated water flowing over their gills all times. If they don't, then they die. So they can never stop swimming. They're always swimming. They sleep swimming. And if they do, they get canned usually. And I'm afraid, everyone, we're all tuna now. This isn't going to stop. We haven't got time to sleep. And actually, the pace of this change is only going to accelerate. I think that's why leaders right now have an almost impossible balancing act. You know, and in the session that I was privileged to be invited to earlier, I think we heard some of this. How do we prepare our organizations for a future which is going to be so different we can barely even get our heads around it, while continuing to churn out the really good maritime professionals that we need and the economy and industry needs tomorrow and the year after? Well, here's the good news. You don't have to do it alone. When you look at why technology is moving so quickly, it's partly things like open sourcing. Faster iteration and collaboration is absolutely the heart of that. Platforms and the ecosystems that form around them are the future of business. And it's also going to redefine the future of work. And that's critical. MGI did this report research, actually, lots of companies around the world, asking them about automation, the future of the workforce. And this is really the conclusion that all stakeholders have to work together if we're going to meet the needs of these large-scale retraining and the huge transitional challenges that are coming ahead of us. Survey respondents expect social and emotional, technological and higher cognitive skills to increase, with huge consequences for credentialing systems of today. Again, we heard some of this earlier, in the discussions. Someone mentioned, how do we measure EQ? These things are really, really important, but the credentialing systems that we have right now, they just don't take account. They focus on skills or knowledge levels, not things like problem solving, stakeholder management, or creative thinking, which are becoming more and more important. The kind of jobs are going to change completely as well. I was delighted to hear Mr. Uno of the Nippon Foundation earlier talking about his visit and seeing maritime professionals who are effectively sitting in front of screens and it looks like they're playing games. The nature of the kind of roles that we're going to be doing are completely different. New-collar jobs, as they've been described, at the nexus of the traditional blue-collar and white-collar managerial jobs, combining technical skills with a higher educational background. They could redefine the workforce across sectors. And, of course, learning to work has now completely turned on its head. That's become working to learn. It's definitely continuous learning as far as employers and industry are concerned. Establishing a culture of lifelong learning is the change most needed. It's no good doing a qualification and walking away. And then there's the portability of skills. I mentioned Eva earlier. I said she may not stay in this industry. They want portfolio careers, these younger generations. So it's essential that we give them skills that are portable across industries and across sectors. As these ecosystems develop, we're crossing industry boundaries, and we have to have skills and educational frameworks that allow them to do the same. This is, what McKinsey comes up with. This is the kind of stakeholder map. And look, educational institutions, it's absolutely critical that with labour agencies, industry associations, non-profit organisations, everyone has to come together with industry to try and map this, to do their part. So I don't want you to think of yourselves as universities in the future. And this isn't just relevant to maritime, this is relevant to every subject taught in universities. But for you specifically, you need to think of yourselves as part of a new intelligent transportation ecosystem. And you need a vision for the future to do it. What drives that vision, or what should drive that vision, is solving problems. And the bigger the problem that you can solve, the bigger the opportunity that you have. I had Google down at Posidonia a couple of years ago, and somebody in the audience asked the guy from Google, he said, "You're not interested in shipping and maritime because it's too niche." Actually, he was American, so he said niche. And this is what the guy from Google said. He said, "We're interested in solving big world-scale problems, and if shipping has those, then we're interested in them." I cannot think of another industry that can boast as many world-scale problems as shipping can try and tackle. Radical transparency, which is what's coming down the line, will lead the fight against ocean acidification, emissions, seafarer abandonment, and crew fatality rates. As we begin building autonomous and unmanned ships, we're going to use intelligent materials, AI, new forms of propulsion, new forms of connectivity, and hopefully start developing the sustainable cyber-physical logistics systems that the world desperately needs, because what we've got at the moment is completely unsustainable. So what you need to be part of, what you need to drive, is a platform that taps this global brain that doesn't just think of the students in your university, but taps the global brain that connects people, problems, ideas, and solutions. We have to get out of our silos. And, you know, we've got a new generation of blue entrepreneurs. As I said, they want to solve maritime problems, but they're not necessarily going to be in a maritime university. They're entrepreneurs. They're looking for problems to solve. Reach out to them. And it's not just this young generation of blue entrepreneurs. The people in maritime, right here, they're ready. We know they're ready. We do something called the Crew Connectivity Survey every couple of years. Over 6,000 serving seafarers responded to this survey last year. 50% of them said one or more elements of their role had been automated in the last 2 years, and 98% of them said automation had had a positive effect on their role. We also asked them about a range of technologies and said, oh, these are a threat or an opportunity. I don't know if you can read these, but it's augmented virtual reality, AI, big data, robotics. Every single one of those they view as an opportunity, every single one. There's only one in the middle here, and that's unmanned ships. But even so, still 39% believe that unmanned ships are an opportunity for their role. The future has no guarantees, and it has a set of constantly shifting parameters. So if you came expecting to be told what's going to happen in the future, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. But there is one question that you can ask yourself, and you need to keep asking yourselves, and that is, what value does my organization bring when the power of computing doubles, quadruples, or grows by a power of 8? Because this is Moore's law in action, and that is what you are facing within the next 6 to 10 years. It means we have to totally rethink how value is created and how value is delivered. Since the Renaissance, I think shipping can genuinely claim to have broadened the mind of the world. I don't think that's a stretch. The people who went down to the sea in ships had courage. They thought big. These are not people who like indoor work with no heavy lifting and a cup of cocoa before bed. That is not shipping people. And you know what? You've got to think big once again. Think big and then think even bigger. Because if you don't, you, along with every other industry sector, risk stagnation and ultimate irrelevance. Mr. Uno quoted JFK earlier today. He said, ask not what IAMU can do for you, but what you can do for it. I'm afraid I'm going to quote JFK as well. He said, we all came from the sea. All of us have in our veins the exact same percentage of salt in our blood that exists in the ocean. And therefore, we have salt in our blood, in our sweat, and in our tears. We're tied to the ocean. And when we go back, we're going back from whence we came. The sea is in everybody's blood. And I will give you one guarantee. The blue domain is only going to become more visible and more critical in the years and the decades to come. Of that, I have no doubt whatsoever. So let's finish off with another president, FDR. 1936, he said, there is a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given, and to others, much is expected. This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. He said that in 1936. 100 years on from then, 2036, the generation in the ascendancy, due to the naming conventions we have, will be Generation Beta, which I think is quite ironic. Now, I think that Generation Beta could be the one that unlocks human potential. I truly believe that. But whether it is a generation to which much is given or of which much is expected is not a mysterious cycle. It's actually very simple. It is down to what we all in this room and outside it choose to do, and equally choose not to do in the months, years, and decades that are ahead of us. Individuals now have more opportunities to influence their lives and the lives of those around them than in all of human history. And yet, have you noticed people seem to feel helpless? It's very bizarre. We have huge levers at our disposal, and yet we all feel helpless. Your job is to unleash them. Unleash the people that are coming to you to learn about the world. Because as leaders in this e-naissance, I think you can bring a couple of things. The first one is context, and the second one is vision. Because if you can provide people with a vision, that leads to trust. Trust leads to resilience, and resilience leads to belief. A belief in the future. Because it is not enough to predict. It is not enough to be predictive about the future. You have to have a vision for what that future should look like, and you need to go about making it reality, because the truth is, the future is not somewhere that we go. The future is something that we create. We all create it together. So my passing message to you is, as I always say, don't try and predict the future, be the future. And if you want more of this rubbish, I also have a book. It's been a pleasure and an honour speaking to you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.